And now that local official, who is the subject of that very messy arrest when authorities finally tried to take him into custody back in March, right now that local Republican official in Florida presents a sort of good news, bad news situation for Florida Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. The bad news, of course, is that that local Republican official, the county tax collector, Joel Greenberg, he's a close associate, a close friend, apparently, of Florida Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. Joel Greenberg, according to news reports, he has reportedly been telling prosecutors for months about how he and Congressman Gaetz have paid young women for sex and about what he alleges to have been considerable drug use in conjunction with those encounters. And most worryingly, he has reportedly told prosecutors about Congressman Gaetz's own alleged sexual involvement with an underage girl, apparently the same underage girl who is cited in the felony child sex trafficking charges that Mr. Greenberg himself is facing. Now, Matt Gaetz has consistently denied all of those accusations, but that's the bad news about him and his longstanding friendship with Joel Greenberg and what Joel Greenberg has reportedly been telling prosecutors. All right, that's the bad news. The only good news here for Congressman Gaetz is that Joel Greenberg has all the markings of a not super fantastic witness in any courtroom, right? In terms of his believability, his credibility, his overall gravitas. I mean, as I mentioned, he has been charged with 33 felonies, including multiple counts of fraud, one charge of making false allegations against a political rival. Also, from what the police described as the situation when they arrested him back in March, it also just seems like he's a little unhinged. That doesn't help. None of that makes for a great witness in terms of the credibility of his testimony against a sitting congressman or against anybody. But now, today, prosecutors today submitted to federal court in Florida a proposed plea agreement that they have drawn up with Joel Greenberg. And in that, they basically explain the safeguards they want to put on him to make sure he's a truthful witness. And those are considerable, and that's really interesting. But the plea agreement they filed for him today also includes all the stuff that he's pleading guilty to as part of this plea agreement. And the description of those things is long and detailed and also very gross. Here's some of it. Quote, Joel Micah Greenberg was elected as Seminole County tax collector in 2016. He started in office on or about January 3rd, 2017. During his tenure as tax collector and after his arrest in 2020, Mr. Greenberg committed multiple federal criminal offenses. Mr. Greenberg paid for commercial sex acts. In particular, Greenberg was involved in what are sometimes referred to as sugar daddy relationships, where he paid women for sex, but attempted to disguise the payments as school-related expenses or other living expenses. Greenberg had an online account at a website that advertised itself as a place where sugar daddies could find sugar babies. Ew. Greenberg used an account at that website to identify women whom he later paid to engage in commercial sex acts with him and others. Greenberg used at least 4 different accounts to pay for commercial sex acts: his personal Venmo account, his personal American Express account, his American Express account at the tax collector's office. Oh, that's nice. And his personal bank account from December 2016 to December 2018. He used those accounts to conduct more than 150 financial transactions totaling over $70,000, all of which involved Greenberg paying women for commercial sex acts using those accounts. One of the individuals who Greenberg paid for commercial sex acts was a minor under the age of 18 for part of the time when Greenberg paid her to engage in commercial sex acts. Greenberg engaged in commercial sex acts with the minor in the Middle District of Florida at least 7 times while she was a minor. During these commercial sex acts, Greenberg would often would offer and supply the minor and others with ecstasy, the drug ecstasy, which Greenberg would take himself as well. Oftentimes, Greenberg would offer to pay the minor and others an additional amount of money if they took the ecstasy. Greenberg also introduced the minor to other adult men who engaged in commercial sex acts with the minor in the Middle District of Florida. Other adult men, plural. Now, these are all statements by the prosecutor's office that don't really count as allegations anymore. These are all things that Joel Greenberg is explicitly admitting to. He has initialed every page of this proposed plea agreement. And at this point in the agreement, prosecutors go on to describe lots of corroborating evidence they say they have to support Greenberg's claims, including records of his communications with this underage girl and other stuff. They also basically nail him to the wall in terms of what his time is going to be like now, now that he's turning state's evidence. I mean, listen to this. In terms of Matt Gaetz thinking about whether or not Joel Greenberg is going to truthfully and authoritatively testify against him, listen to this. Defendant agrees to cooperate fully with the United States in the investigation and prosecution of other persons and to testify subject to a prosecution for perjury or make a false statement fully or truthfully before any federal court proceeding or federal grand jury in connection with the charges in this case and other matters. Such cooperation to further include a full and complete disclosure of all relevant information, including production of any and all books, papers, documents, and other objects in defendant's possession or control, and to be reasonably available for interviews which the United States may require. The defendant may be prosecuted for any perjury or false declarations, if any, committed while testifying pursuant to this agreement, or for obstruction of justice. The United States may prosecute the defendant for the charges which are to be dismissed pursuant to this agreement, if any, and may either seek reinstatement of or refile such charges and prosecute the defendant thereon. So this is not good for Matt Gaetz. This part of the agreement is not good because this is Matt Gaetz's friend, Joel Greenberg. He has reportedly been telling investigators about him and Matt Gaetz both paying for sex, including with an underage girl. He has been facing 33 felony charges. But today he pled guilty to 6 of the 33 felonies. He signed this binding document agreeing to cooperate with prosecutors and testify against other people. If he lies to the prosecutors, he affirms here in this agreement that he will face perjury charges or obstruction of justice charges. He also affirms that if he lies or leaves anything out in cooperating with prosecutors, the other 27 felony charges against him, those are coming back. There have been 33 felonies pending against him. He's pleading guilty to 6, so they'll drop the other 27. If he is not a good cooperator, they're going to hit him with those other 27 as well as the 6 he's now pled guilty to. One of the charges he's pleading to in this agreement, the child sex trafficking charge, carries a mandatory minimum prison sentence of 10 years. So even with this cooperation agreement, it's not like the guy is skating. But the question that we can see in this plea deal is whether that same kind of charge and its 10-year minimum prison sentence is now credibly looming over Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.